In the UK, it was reported by Watchdog that as of 2015, the number of foster children that were reported missing was 4,245, and a report done by Ofsted found that there had been a 36% rise in those disappearances. The UK government website says that as early as 2022, statistics show that 12,150 kids in care were missing. Research by the National Youth Advocacy Service found that more than 20 children are reported missing in England every hour, and around one child in Wales is reported missing each hour. A report by local councils found that Kent had the highest number of times kids went missing between 2014 and 2015. And according to the Department of Education, children in care have a higher chance of going missing compared to kids not in care, and that 1 in every 10 kids in care disappearance each year. Finally, in the United States of America, thousands of kids in care are lost track of by social services, and an audit done by the Department of Health and Human Services revealed that 46 states across America had failed to report 34,800 children who went missing from their foster homes to police. In today's episode, we are going to discuss the cases of 4 separate children who went missing whilst in the care of foster and adoptive families, the ones who were meant to protect them. It was in April of 2002 when social worker Dora Betancourt was given the case file of 4-year-old Rilya Wilson, as her foster mother had applied to adopt her. As she began looking through Rilya's case file, she noticed that no social worker had checked on her since January 2001, even though they were meant to visit her monthly. Knowing that 15 months without checking up on a foster child is not good, Dora called the foster family's home to schedule a home visit. She eventually got through to a woman who said her name was Pamela Graham, the sister of Geraldine Graham, and scheduled her to visit on the 18th of April 2002. Rilya Wilson had been born on the 29th of September 1996 to her mum Gloria Wilson, a drug addict, who had been in foster care since she was 14 and had been a stripper. She had given birth to her first daughter, Randy, who was given to Gloria's godparents, then given back to Gloria, but Randy was soon taken into care by social services after abuse allegations were sent to them. After having Rilya, Gloria gave her away to a close friend called Pamela Kendrick. Pamela Kendrick lovingly cared for Rilya for 2.5 years and was the aunt of Rilya's biological dad, Manville. In Pamela's care, Rilya was cared for lovingly and thrived, having a happy childhood there, always happy and hugging everyone she met, and all of Pamela's family loved Rilya. At this time, Gloria was pregnant with her 3rd child, Roderica, and Gloria met a woman called Geraldine Graham, the mother of Roderica's dad. After giving birth, social services placed Roderica into Geraldine Graham's care. Still in Pamela Kendrick's care, Rilya was thriving, but Geraldine Graham wanted Rilya herself, so she called social services in 2000 claiming that she had been in Pamela's house and saw Rilya sat in a pile of feces, naked, and was swearing. Pamela said this was lies, that social services removed Rilya from her care and put her in the care of Geraldine Graham. Geraldine never liked Rilya, never hugged her, and was cold and distant with her. She would constantly punish Rilya, locking her in a room for hours and days at a time, and would lock her in a dog cage, would beat her and tie her hands together most nights. After being put in Geraldine's care, her social worker, Deborah Muscoli, stopped bothering to check on Rilya for 15 months. Dora Betancourt drove on the 18th of April 2002 to the scheduled home visit at Geraldine's house. Arriving there, Geraldine was getting out of her car with Roderica, Rilya's sister. Dora then asked where Rilya was, and Geraldine said, "I thought you were bringing her here," and went on to explain how a woman claiming to be a social worker had taken Rilya with her in 2001 and she had not seen her since. Dora then phoned her supervisor to report Rilya missing and found no report on their side of a social worker taking Rilya away from Geraldine. Even though she reported missing to the supervisors on the 18th of April, it took them a whole week to contact police, and social services still kept Roderica in Geraldine's care after this until May, when they finally removed her. They also found that after Geraldine had claimed Pamela was neglecting Rilya, Geraldine had then told them to give Rilya to her as she was her paternal grandmother, but social services had never bothered checking her DNA before removing Rilya and placing her into Geraldine's care. Geraldine then began receiving benefits and food stamps for her. Social services then claimed they had done a criminal record check on Geraldine before they had put Rilya in her care, and that their checks showed she had no criminal record, So the local newspaper did their own criminal record check on Geraldine, and they found an extensive criminal record of her committing fraud, and found she would use 38 separate aliases and would falsely claim to have mental illnesses. Rilya's original social worker, Deborah Muscoli, was charged with misconduct. It came out that although she was supposed to conduct monthly home visits to physically check on Rilya, she had never bothered to do them, but would falsely claim back travel expenses for those visits to her supervisors, and she had slacked off so much that even Rilya's other sister, Randy, who was in the care of adoptive parents, had not even known they had a social worker until Rilya was reported missing, as Deborah had never visited them either. By 2004, Geraldine had been charged with welfare and food stamp fraud for a different case, and was in jail when an inmate who shared a cell with Geraldine, called Robin, spoke to police about how Geraldine had told her how she had admitted to her that she had smothered Rilya with a pillow and buried her in a place where her soul could be cleansed, telling Robin that Rilya was evil, and whispered to Robin, "I killed it." Police charged Geraldine with murder in March 2005, though they didn't find her body, and her trial began on the 26th of November 2012. During the trial, various friends and witnesses told the court how Rilya had been treated by Geraldine. It also came out in the trial that Pamela Graham, the woman who had answered the phone claiming to be Geraldine's sister, was not actually her sister, but was actually in a relationship with Geraldine. Pamela would watch as the abuse happened, and said she had last seen Rilya in December 2000 when she had come home from work and she was no longer there. Geraldine was found guilty of kidnap, child abuse and the murder of Rilya Wilson, and on the 12th of February 2013, she received 55 years in prison. Deborah Muscoli, the original social worker, soon resigned from her job and pled guilty to her charges. She got 5 years of probation and had to pay restitution to the state. Jaliek Rainwalker was living with his adoptive parents, Stephen and Jocelyn Kerr, in their isolated and remote home in Washington, New York. He lived there with their 3 biological children and another foster child. Jaliek was born on the 2nd of August 1995 to an alcoholic and cocaine-addicted mum, and when he was born, he had drugs in his system. His mother lost custody of Jaliek when he was a baby. Soon, it was clear he had special needs, so he was put into therapeutic foster homes where the foster parents are trained for dealing with children who have physical, psychological and emotional needs. Before being given to Stephen and Jocelyn Kerr, Jaliek went through 6 foster families, and the last family he had lived with were going to adopt him but backed out due to his behavioral issues. He went to live with Stephen and Jocelyn in 2003, who were trained to deal with his additional needs, and a year after fostering Jaliek, the Kerrs decided to officially adopt him. Whilst in their care, he would have violent outbursts. His adoptive grandmother would take him out for the day and said he was always happy and nice to be around, and she said that he would only have a violent outburst when people would mention his past. Everything soon changed one day at the Kerrs when they had been homeschooling all their children. One of the other kids had been bullying Jaliek and messing around with his shoelaces, so Jaliek threatened to hurt that child in a really violent way. At that point, Stephen and Jocelyn started trying to reverse the adoption of Jaliek and called the Department of Family Services on the 23rd of October 2007 to get Jaliek removed from their care, and were told it's not possible to reverse an adoption as the child is now their responsibility. They later found out that it would be a more lengthy and extensive process to get him removed from their care. They both decided that they wanted him out of their house during this time, so chose to put him into respite care. They put him into the temporary care of Elaine and Tom Person at the end of October. They asked her to look after him for 2 weeks, but Elaine said she could only care for him for a few days from the 27th of October until the 1st of November, then they would have to take him back on the 1st, and she said she could look after him again from the 6th of November. Elaine and Tom had cared for Jaliek in the past, so he was used to them. Elaine said that for those few days she cared for Jaliek, he had been kind and respectful, would help her with housework and walk her dogs for her, and helped her with the groceries and helped her look after the other children she cared for. Elaine said that on the 2nd day he was there, she took him out to a Halloween fun fair and he loved it. He opened up to Elaine about how life was like living with the Kerrs, that they lived in a small cramped house that had no indoor plumbing and no running water, and how him and the 4 other kids had to sleep in a room with Stephen and Jocelyn. All of the kids had to take it in turns to collect water from a well located near the house and to use the toilet. They had to use an outhouse in the garden, and they were only allowed to eat meat once a week and could bath every 2 weeks, and that one time he accidentally didn't close the toilet roll holder properly, so they banned him from using the outhouse toilet and forced him to use the grass by the trees instead, and that Stephen was always shouting and throwing stuff at him. He told Elaine how he was homeschooled while their biological son was in a $17,000 a year private school, and that him and the other foster girl were meant to be in therapy, with the state giving Stephen and Jocelyn $3,000 each month to be used to put them both in therapy, but they weren't doing that. Elaine said during his stay, he would mostly read all the books she owned and she enjoyed him being there. On the 1st of November, Stephen picked up Jaliek, and instead of driving him back to their own home in Washington County, he was driven to Stephen's parents' empty home, and they both went to sleep. Stephen claims that when he woke up in the morning he went to check on Jaliek at 7 a.m. and found him sleeping, so decided to let him sleep a bit longer. When he returned again later, Jaliek was gone. When he went into the kitchen, he found a note left from Jaliek that said Albany, and a letter that said, "Dear everybody, I'm sorry for everything. I won't bother you anymore. Goodbye, Jaliek." Seeing that his 12-year-old son was missing at 7:30 a.m., Stephen then took a shower and calmly drove to a video store to return some movie rentals. He then drove home and called the police at 8:57 a.m. Police got there, and Stephen suggested they shouldn't be concerned anyway, as Jaliek had probably joined a gang, and told them he had homicidal tendencies. That weekend, the police did an extensive search of the surrounding area looking for him, leaving no stone unturned, and followed up every single sighting reported to them, including one sighting of a boy with a backpack walking along Route 29, but police never found anything more. Stephen and Jocelyn offered to take polygraph tests, and while Jocelyn took the test, Stephen refused and walked out of the police station and stopped cooperating with the police. The police and the FBI subpoenaed Stephen's phone records so they could look into his alibi. In December 2007, a task force was put together by Elaine and Tom Person and most of his previous foster families, calling it the Find Jaliek Task Force, opening a hotline and a website, and would run fundraisers and educational events, and their belief was that Jaliek didn't run away. And Elaine explained that the letter left behind that day saying goodbye had actually been written at her house after Stephen and Jocelyn said he needed to write them a sorry letter, and Elaine said the letter was written for being kicked out of their homeschooling program. During a vigil held for Jaliek, Stephen was there removing flyers and leaflets about Jaliek. Stephen and Jocelyn then offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to Jaliek, then said they would take $5,000 off the reward money each month unless they got any information. His adoptive grandmother, Barbara, attended all of the vigils and interviews and stated that she also doesn't think he's alive anymore, and told the public how 3 years previously, Stephen had held Jaliek's head underwater. Barbara was always determined to get justice for Jaliek, and because she didn't want him to ever go back with Stephen and Jocelyn, Barbara went to court to fight for custody in case Jaliek did ever return in court. A judge denied her request, so a few days later, Barbara broke into the Kerr's home where she found a piece of clothing that Jaliek had been wearing when he went missing, which became a huge piece of evidence for the police as it allowed them to get a search warrant on the house. Stephen and Jocelyn had already moved to Vermont. On the 14th of January 2008, police named Stephen as a person of interest due to his story having too many inconsistencies, and on the 23rd of January 2008, a suspicious letter was sent to the police saying, "Jaliek still alive, needed a foot soldier for this war on drugs. Picked him up Route 40, Post 30. He's okay, no fake. He says ask his mama and papa. Who are the Macaroni family? My cat named Diamond. Why does Franti yell fire? Don't try to look, we are not there." More searches were done, but nothing was ever found, and as of 2012 it changed from a runaway case to a probable homicide case. Austin, Dylan and David lived with their mother, who had severe depression, bipolar and PTSD. Due to medication she was on, would sleep throughout the day, but she still tried her best to give her 3 sons a good childhood. One day, social services received a complaint from their school saying that the boys were being abused and neglected at home because one time, Dylan had gone to school with a dog bite on his back and leg. Social services visited their mum, who explained the dog bite to them, that there was a nearby dog kennel and the boys loved going there to play with the dogs, but social services decided it was better to put her 3 sons into foster care. They were then placed into the care of Edward and Linda Bryant, who lived in Monument, Colorado in 1999, and their mum was allowed to visit her sons every Wednesday and on weekends, and she would also call them most days and spend hours talking on the phone to her boys. As time went on, everyone was happy with the arrangement. The boys seemed happy with the Bryants, and their mum was able to cope better with her mental health issues. Eventually, Edward and Linda approached the boys' mum and asked if they could legally adopt the boys. Their mum went away and thought about it and thought that she couldn't give her sons the life they deserved, and she wanted her sons to have a proper mother and father figure to be there for them, and she felt she couldn't care for them in her situation, so she accepted their offer of adoption. The Bryants then applied to adopt them, and as the process started, they changed Dylan's name to Edward, the foster dad's name. Dylan hated being called Edward and continuously asked everyone to not call him Edward, as his name was Dylan, and began swearing, and their biological mum had never heard Dylan swear or be angry before. Once the adoption was finalized, Dylan and Austin started constantly asking their mum when they can come home, as they didn't want to be there anymore. As soon as the adoption was finalized, Linda Bryant told their biological mum to never call them again. At the time of their adoption, Austin was 4, Dylan was 7, and David was 15 months old. Linda and Edward were getting $1,800 each month towards the boys' care, as both had special needs. Dylan had been diagnosed with ADHD. To keep receiving the money, they had to make a monthly roster to show the boys were in their home and had to provide the government proof that the boys were in education, but no one had to physically check the boys were in the house. Every 3 years, Edward and Linda had to go in for an interview without the children. There was an incident in April 2002 where the police had been called when Austin had gone missing. As the police started searching for him, Austin walked out of the bushes because he had ran away. He was then given back to the Bryants. Edward and Linda separated and started living separately. They both moved to Texas in 2005, and by 2007, Linda filed for bankruptcy, wrote on the form that she cared for 8 children because after she had adopted Austin, Dylan and David, she had gone on to adopt another 5 children, and for these 8 children, she was getting $5,500 every month for their care. Linda's own daughter was also a foster parent, and police were called by her 2 foster kids in January 2011 saying that they were Linda's daughter's foster kids back in 2003, and that whenever they went to Linda's house, Austin would always have black eyes, welts, bruises, and that Linda would lock Austin in a small trunk, would tase him and was starving him and force Austin to run up and down the stairs. Austin also told them stories about Dylan, but the boys had never seen Dylan before. They were telling the police this because they hadn't seen Austin since 2003 and were concerned. Police began an investigation. Looking through records, they saw that Austin had been removed from public school to be homeschooled back in 2003, and in December 2003 someone had claimed medic aid on behalf of Dylan, though Dylan was no believed to have gone missing before 2003. After 2003, there were no other records or information on Austin. Edward and Linda continued receiving the $1,800 a month payments after the boys had gone missing because Linda would make up fake schools and fake education documents to give to the government so she could continue getting the payments. The documents she would give them had a fake school's name on it, and no one ever checked to see if the school even existed. It was found that in October 2010, Linda had sent off paperwork saying Dylan was going to graduate in 2011 as she wanted to keep getting paid after he turned 18. The police decided to find Austin and Dylan's younger brother. He was now in the army in Fort Campbell, so they went and spoke to him. He told them that he had moved in with the Bryants in 2001, and by then, Dylan wasn't there. Meaning Dylan went missing sometime in the year of living with them. He went on to say how the Bryants abused Austin by locking him in a footlocker and would hear his brother banging on the footlocker trying to escape for hours. He mentioned one time when a social worker had scheduled an appointment to inspect their home, so Linda told him to get one of his friends to pretend he was Austin or Dylan, but that appointment was cancelled in the end. With all this new information, police went to question Linda and Edward. Linda claimed that Dylan and Austin were now adults who had moved out and that she was no longer in contact with them. She then changed her story and said that one day, the boys had gone to visit their biological grandmother's home in Oklahoma and never came back. So police surrounded their grandmother's home, searched it, and realized the boys had never even been there. When their biological mother found out they were missing, she was distraught. Police spoke with Linda's daughter and her other foster children, who all said Linda told them the boys had been institutionalized, then changed her story and told everyone the boys ran away in May 2003. Police questioned Edward, who only said that Dylan had ran away in 2001 and Austin ran away in 2005. Linda and Edward were arrested in 2011. Linda told them that she would print off pictures from Google of random boys and put them into frames around her house pretending they were Austin and Dylan. She also said she wasn't starving Austin, she called it delayed feeding. They were charged with fraud, forgery and attempting to influence a public official, as they had collected $175,000 in benefits for Dylan and Austin since they went missing. Linda faced 148 felony charges, all charges relating to the money they had taken and no charge at all in relation to the boys' disappearances. Edward was also facing 13 charges relating to the money taken. When Linda was asked what she thinks should happen to her for taking the money, she said she would accept the charges and take a manslaughter charge in exchange for keeping Edward out of prison, even though no one had talked about manslaughter. Linda pled guilty in 2012 to 54 charges, all relating to the money, and received 42 years in prison. Edward got 30 years in prison. Edward is now out on parole and Linda is still in prison. The boys are still missing.